I was standing over the open grave when the ground started whispering my name. Not loud, not like in a movie. Just this dry, papery rustle in the January wind that somehow folded itself into 2 syllables. Daniel. The sound crawled up from the coffin, through the frost and clay, and settled in my ears as clearly as if someone had leaned in and breathed it straight into my skull. You do not tell anyone that the dirt just talked to you. You especially do not do that when you are 57, a retired homicide detective, and the forensic techs around you already think you came back to the job just to chase ghosts. So, like a professional, I did the only reasonable thing. I pretended I had not heard my own name coming from a grave that had been sealed for 58 years. Mr. Howe? One of the younger techs looked up at me. You okay? You went kind of pale there. Cold air, I said. My voice sounded normal, which surprised me. Let's get this done before the ground freezes again. The plaque on the old stone read, Maria Ellen Carter, 1951 to 1964, forever, our little girl forever. That word hits different when you know exactly how long forever lasted. One March afternoon in 1964, a walk home from school that never completed, and then 58 years of silence. Now I was here, in a rural Pennsylvania cemetery, watching them bring her back up, because a machine in a lab 3 states away had whispered something just as crazy as the soil had. It said, we might finally know who killed her. If you are expecting a proud speech about justice or never giving up, you are going to be disappointed. The truth is uglier. I did not reopen Maria Carter's case because I am some noble hero. I did it because I could not sleep. Because 2 years into retirement, I realized my life was quieter than most homicide scenes I had worked, and the silence was killing me slower than any bullet could. My name is Daniel Howe. 28 years with the Pennsylvania State Police, most of them in major crimes. 2 divorces, no kids, a mortgage in Scranton, a mild ulcer, and a long history of talking to dead people. Not literally. At least, not back then. You talked to them in your head. Where were you going? Who did this to you? What did we miss? And you hope that somewhere in that one-sided conversation, your brain catches a detail your eyes ignored. It is a coping mechanism dressed up as investigative technique. But Maria was different. I met her for the first time on a rainy Tuesday, 6 months into my retirement. I was in the basement of my own house, of all places, digging through old boxes, because my ex-wife had told me she might finally come pick up the rest of her stuff, which, of course, she did not. Instead, I found an old banker's box marked in my own handwriting. Unresolved personal. Inside were photocopies of cases that had gotten under my skin. You are not supposed to take material like that home, but every detective does. They creep into your briefcase like strays. The Carter files sat on top, yellowing around the edges. A 12-year-old girl, abducted on her way home from school in March 1964, in a small town called Red Hollow, Pennsylvania. She never made it to the house 3 blocks away. Her body was found 2 days later in an abandoned coal shed on the outskirts of the town. Assaulted, strangled, left in the dark with her schoolbooks scattered around her like they had tried to crawl away. The investigation back then was primitive by our standards. Fingerprints dusted, shoe impressions photographed, a few fibers collected, but most of it boxed and forgotten as the years rolled past. Suspects were questioned, a neighbor, a teacher, a drifter passing through, but nothing stuck, no charges. No justice. Just a file that got thinner as people retired and died. I had pulled it once, late in my career, for a cold case initiative that the department did for the media. A kind of public relations stunt. Show the cameras we still care. Put up some posters. Maybe get lucky. Then the budget shrank, priorities shifted, and Maria went back into storage. That night in my basement, I did something I had not done the first time I handled her file. I read every page like I knew her. Her mother's statement. Her father's shaking, angry handwriting when he tried to describe the day they lost her. The autopsy photos, black and white, grainy, but still capable of cutting right through my practiced detachment. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting on the concrete floor, the file open across my knees, and I could not shake one thought. If this had happened today, we would have nailed whoever did it in a month. There had been biological material collected from the scene. Back in 1964, they could not do anything meaningful with it beyond blood typing. Now it was gold. If, and this was a big if, it still existed, and if it had been stored properly, and if someone, somewhere, was willing to listen to a retired cop with insomnia. That is how this started. Not justice, not duty. Just a man who could not stand the idea that a 12-year-old girl had vanished into history because of bad timing. 2 months later, I was standing in the archives facility in Harrisburg, breathing in the smell of old paper, cooling systems, and indifference. The clerk, a woman in her 30s with more tattoos than patience, wheeled out a gray box with a label that made my chest tighten. Carter Maria Ellen, 1964, Red Hollow. Sign here, she said. And don't open anything sealed without logging it. Chain of custody, all that fun stuff. I remember, I said. She looked me over. Right. You are one of the dinosaurs. Jurassic period, I said. Be careful. I might bite. She snorted and walked off. Small victories. I carried the box to one of the metal tables, the kind that always feel a couple of degrees colder than the air around them. My hands did not shake, not visibly anyway, as I lifted the lid. Inside, there were the usual things, reports, photos, evidence logs. And then, at the bottom, a smaller, brown cardboard container with a red sticker. Biological. Do not discard. Come on, I whispered. Come on, Maria. Let's see what you left us. When I lifted the brown box, something shifted. The air in the room cooled, just enough that my breath fogged for a second in front of my face. The overhead lights hummed a little louder, and for no good reason at all, the hairs on my arms stood up. You work in this field long enough, you learn not to romanticize moments. A weird draft, a failing light, an overactive imagination, that is all. But as I set the box down and broke the seal, a tiny shiver walked down my spine, like someone had just run the back of their fingers along it. Inside were 2 glass slides, each wrapped in aging paper, and one sealed envelope with the word swabs handwritten in fading ink. I exhaled slowly. If these samples had survived, if they still contained viable DNA, then the world Maria had died in, and the world I stood in now, might finally touch. I did not hear any voices then. No whispers, no names. Just the quiet creak of time bending, ever so slightly. DNA is a strange kind of ghost. It hangs around long after the person is gone, carrying stories no one ever asked it to tell. These stories do not care about your alibis, your lies, your long, respectable life in another state with a new name. They sit patient in microscopic spirals, waiting for someone to shine the right light. In this case, that someone was a young forensic analyst named Priya Desai. We met in the lab 3 weeks after I had signed Maria's samples over. The lab was brighter and cleaner than any precinct I had ever worked in, and it smelled like disinfectant and plastic, not coffee and sweat. Priya was maybe early 30s, hair pulled back, dark eyes that told you she slept less than she should, but liked what she did. You are the retired detective, she said, not a question. And you are the wizard, I said. She smiled. I prefer molecular biologist, but I will accept wizard on Fridays. You picked an interesting one to drag out of the archives, Mr. Hawley. Call me Daniel, I said. How bad is it? She gestured to a digital screen where lines and peaks formed, a kind of abstract cityscape. Considering these samples are older than my parents? Not bad at all. She explained the details: degradation, partial profiles, stochastic effects, and I nodded at the right times, understanding maybe 60% of the jargon. What mattered was the headline. They had pulled a usable DNA profile from the biological material found on Maria's clothing. Even better, the profile was male, and it did not match anyone in the original case, as far as could be checked from existing records. Now comes the part you are really interested in, Priya said. Let me guess, I said. The part where you tell me no promises, and this could still go nowhere. That, and... She turned back to the keyboard. The part where we run this through CodeES and also upload it to the genetic genealogy database. And you go home, and you pretend not to stare at your phone for the next few weeks. I did not tell her that staring at my phone was my primary hobby these days. What are the odds? I asked. She shrugged. If he was arrested after the 90s for a qualifying offense, and his DNA went into CODIS, we might get a direct hit. If not, genealogy is slower. We look for relatives, build a tree, track it down. Months, sometimes years. Maria has waited 58, I said. She can forgive a few more months. As I turned to leave the lab, something caught my eye on the screen behind her. A string of alphanumeric code. The reference for Maria's sample flickered, just for a moment, replaced by a different sequence. DH to 572. My initials. And an age that was close enough to mine to make my stomach lurch. Did you see that? I asked. Priya glanced back. See what? The screen. It just glitched. She frowned, tapping a key. Everything looks fine. The system does that sometimes when it is pulling from the server. Don't worry. Your ghost is safe. Ghost? I repeated. She grinned. Old case, dead suspect. Clues from the past. Ghost. You guys are always chasing one. I managed to smile. Yeah, I said. Something like that. But as I left the lab, the image stuck with me. My initials where the dead girls should have been, like the computer was trying to tell us something and got the address wrong. Here is where the story should slow down. Normally, this is the part where weeks drag past, nothing happens, and the momentum drains out of the case until it's as cold as when you found it. That is not what happened with Maria. 3 days later, my phone rang at 2:13 a.m. Retired cops do not sleep well. You wake fast, trained by years of bad news arriving in the dark. I grabbed the phone from the nightstand, heart already up around my throat. Yeah, I croaked. Daniel? It was Priya, her voice sharp and awake. Sorry to call this late. I thought, actually. No, I did not think. I just called. Nobody calls with a sorry wrong number at 2 in the morning. I said. Talk to me. We got a hit, she said. I sat up. Cody's? No, that would have been too easy. Genetic genealogy. A partial match from a consumer database. It is not your guy, but it is his blood. I swung my legs out of bed. My old knees complained. How close? Looks like a second cousin. Maybe third. I won't know until we run this through the tree. But here is the weird part. There is always a weird part, I muttered. The closest relative we have is dead, she said. Died 8 months ago. Heart attack. But before he died, he did one of those ancestry kits, and he opted into sharing his data for law enforcement matches. That's how we got him. Name? I asked. There was a small pause before she answered, just long enough to make me notice it. Carter, she said. His last name is Carter. James A. Carter. Lived in Ohio. I stared into the darkness of my bedroom. Carter, I repeated. As in same last name as your victim, Priya said. Different branch, same tree. Could be coincidence. Could be nothing. But if our suspect is related to Maria's own family, this just got complicated. It was suddenly hard to breathe. I had read the family statements. The grief, the anger. The father who had died in the 70s. The mother who had faded away in a nursing home. Could a killer hide that close, wrapped in the same surname? Send me what you have, I said. And Priya? Yeah? Don't work this alone. Loop in your supervisor. Document everything. If this is heading where I think it might, people are going to ask a lot of questions. Already done, she said. I'll email you the preliminary report, but... Daniel? Just be ready for this to get messy. Families and secrets, you know. I know, I said. What I did not tell her was that it already felt messy for reasons I could not articulate. Like the way the grave had whispered my name. Like the glitch on the screen. Like a thread pulling taut through time, tying me to a little girl who died before I was even born. The next day, I drove back to Red Hollow for the first time in years. There is a particular sadness to small towns that never fully recovered from the 70s. The main street had more for lease signs than open businesses. The old diner was still there, with the same neon script buzzing weekly in the window. The houses leaned a little more. Paint peeled, lawn ornaments rusted. But some things had not changed. The Carter house sat on the corner of Maple and 3rd, a modest 2-story with white siding and a sagging porch. Someone had repainted it in the last decade, a pale blue that did not quite hide the age. The current owner, a woman in her 50s with a nurse's badge clipped to her scrub top, eyed me warily when I introduced myself. You from the police? She asked. Was, I said. Now I am just an old man with some questions about the history of this place. History? She snorted. You mean the murder? No easy way to say it, I admitted. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. Come in. I was about your age when my parents bought this house. We knew what happened here, of course. Everybody did. But the price was good. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and lemon cleaner. The layout was exactly as described in the old scene diagrams. Stairs by the front door, living room to the right, kitchen through the back. The window where Maria's mother had watched for a daughter who never walked down the street that day. I always thought it was strange, the woman said, pouring me coffee without asking if I wanted it, the universal language of small-town hospitality. My mother said Mrs. Carter never left this house after, like she was waiting. She'd sit right there. She pointed to a worn armchair by the window. Every afternoon, long after they found the body. My mom said she talked to her, out loud, like Maria was just running late. Grief does that, I said softly. Maybe, the woman shrugged. Or maybe she knew something and was just trying to forget. People around here, they don't like to talk about it. Almost like they're afraid if they say her name, they'll call something back. Do you ever feel anything? I asked. She gave me an appraising look. What, like ghosts? Strange sounds, drafts, like the house is. Restless. She seemed ready to make a joke, then stopped herself. There is one thing, she said slowly. It could be nothing. Old pipes, bad wiring. But every year, around March, the living room light will flicker at the same time in the afternoon. Always 3:17. My husband thinks it's a clock issue. Electric timer glitch or something. But the electrician says there is no timer. And once, she hesitated, rubbing her arms as if cold. Once my granddaughter was visiting. She was 6. She was playing by the window, and when the light flickered, she asked me, Grandma, who's the girl on the porch? A small chill slid down my back. What girl? I asked. There was no girl, she said. I went to the door, looked outside. Nobody there. But my granddaughter, she swallowed. She said the girl was about her age. Dark hair, wearing a dress with a ribbon. She said the girl looked sad. And then she said, her voice dropped. She said, she wants to know if we can tell her mom she's sorry she's late. The room felt smaller. Did you? I cleared my throat. Did you know what time Maria was supposed to be home that day? In 1964? The woman shook her head. No? Do you? I did. It was in the original report. Maria's mother had written it down, over and over, like a mantra. She was due home by 3:15 p.m., last seen at approximately 3:07. Police notified at 3:42, when she still had not arrived. 3:17 p.m., right between hope and panic. The same time the light in this house flickered every March. Probably nothing, I said aloud, more to myself than to her. Sure, she said. Probably. We both pretended to believe it. By the time the exhumation order went through, a process that involved more signatures and more uncomfortable conversations than I had prepared for, it was late fall. The Carter family line had mostly emptied out. The last living close relative, a distant niece somewhere in Florida, signed off with a short, shaky phone call. If you can do something for her now, the woman said, do it. Mama used to say the house never stopped listening for Maria. Maybe God hasn't either. So we came to the cemetery on a gray morning, our breath turning to ghosts in front of us. Priya stood beside me, wrapped in a too-thin coat, her gloved hands tucked into her pockets. The local sheriff hovered nearby, doing his best to look supportive and not bored. The crew worked in practiced silence, the backhoe moving earth with slow, respectful bites. Finally, the coffin appeared, streaked with mud and age. As they pried it open, I braced myself for the smell that always comes with old remains, but it was less than I remembered from newer exhumations. Time had done most of the work. What lay inside was mostly bone, a scattering of fabric, and the last physical trace of a little girl who had not made it home. Ready? Priya asked. No, I thought. Not even remotely. Yes, I said. She stepped forward with her team, moving with that careful, reverent efficiency that good forensic people have. Swab, collect, photograph, document. That was when the wind rose. It came out of nowhere. A sudden, swirling gust that rattled the bare branches overhead and sent a flurry of dead leaves skittering across the ground. The techs cursed as their equipment cases wobbled. Someone grabbed for a clipboard before it blew away. And clear as a bell, beneath the howl of the wind, I heard it again. Daniel. Just like that first moment. Dry, papery. The sound of someone trying to speak through dust. I stared down into the open coffin, my heart pounding loud enough that I could feel it in my teeth. Did you hear that? I asked. Hear what? Priya shot me a quick glance, then returned to her work. Nothing, I said automatically. But it was not nothing, because this time the voice did not stop with my name. Daniel, it said again. Don't let it be him. The wind died as suddenly as it had risen. The leaves settled. The cemetery went back to being just a cold, quiet place full of stone and memory. Daniel? Priya's voice sounded normal again. I need you to sign off on the chain of custody forms before we transport these samples, okay? Yeah, I said, forcing my feet to move, my hand to hold a pen steady. As I scribbled my name, one thought pushed past the rational explanations: stress, lack of sleep, and overactive imagination clinging to meaning. The voice, whatever it was, whoever it was, did not want the killer to be who the DNA was pointing at. It did not want it to be family. And for the first time since reopening Maria's case, I wondered if solving this murder might not be the hardest part. Living with the answer might be. The human brain is annoyingly good at explaining things away. By the time I drove home from the cemetery that night, the voice in the grave had already been downgraded in my mind from possible supernatural communication to stress-induced auditory hallucination with wind assist. That is what experience does to you. You do not live almost 3 decades in homicide without developing a thick callus over the part of your mind that wants to believe in omens. You file it under weird and keep moving because the paperwork does not care whether or not the dead are talking. Still, when I showered that night, hot water beating the chill out of my muscles, the words kept repeating behind my eyes, in the same dry whisper. Don't let it be him. It wasn't just the content that bothered me. It was the pronoun. Not don't let it be them. Not don't let it be family. Him, singular, specific, like whoever, whatever, was talking already knew the face at the end of this road, and did not want me to walk that far. I barely slept. The next morning, my phone buzzed before 7. It was an email from Priya with a short subject line, Carter Tree Preliminary. Under it, one sentence, call me when you're ready for a headache. I made coffee so strong it could have stripped paint off my kitchen cabinets, sat at the table, and opened the attachment. Genealogical charts look deceptively simple when you first see them. Boxes, lines, names, dates. A family reduced to a schematic. But when you stare long enough, you start to feel the weight behind those little rectangles. The marriages that worked, the ones that broke, the kids who stayed close, the ones who ran far. Priya had done more in a few days than most cold case squads manage in months. She had taken the partial DNA match from James A. Carter in Ohio and built a sprawling tree, reaching back to the early 1900s. Branches ran up and down the page like winter bare limbs, and right there, highlighted in yellow, was the connection point to my girl. Maria's branch sat on the left side of the chart. Her grandparents, William and Ruth Carter, had settled in Red Hollow after the war. They'd had 3 kids, Arthur, Maria's father, Joanne, and a younger son, Leonard, who had left town in the late 60s and, according to the old notes, lost contact with immediate family. Priya had traced Leonard forward through public records. Turns out he hadn't vanished. He'd just done what half the country did once the highways got good and the factories started hiring. He moved, he married, he had kids in another state. And one of those kids had a son. And that son was named James. James A. Carter, the man in Ohio whose DNA had accidentally raised its hand when the system asked, anyone here related to a ghost in Pennsylvania? He was Maria's second cousin once removed. Not exactly close, but not far enough for comfort. On the right side of the chart, another branch bloomed off the same root. William Carter had a brother Thomas, who never left the county, but whose descendants had scattered more quietly. One of those lines ended with an empty rectangle labeled, Unknown Male Possible Suspect. That was where Priya's notes began to look less like science and more like fortune-telling. Pulling you in already, huh? She said when I called. I could hear the fatigue and excitement braided together in her voice. Sorry for the mess. I tried to make the visuals old man friendly. You think very highly of your elders, I said. Walk me through it like I'm one of the jurors who thinks DNA is magic. Okay, she said. So, starting with what we know, the profile from the crime scene is a full male autosomal profile with a Y chromosome haplogroup that matches the Carter paternal line. That means the source of that DNA is almost certainly a male descendant of the Carter men, or someone in their near paternal line. The genealogical match we have, James, shares about 200 centimorgans of DNA with our unknown source. That puts them in the range of second cousins, give or take. Combine that with the tree, the geography, and the time frame, and we're looking at a small subset of possible males who are the right age and in the right place in 1964. In English, I said. In English, she repeated, it means somebody in Maria's extended family, on her father's side, is almost certainly the one who left DNA on her clothing. Not a stranger. Not the boogeyman from out of town. Someone whose last name she already knew. There are lots of phrases you don't want to hear in an investigation. Contaminated evidence. Compromised scene. Positive for accelerant. But there's a special kind of nausea that comes with someone in the family. It's like learning the wolf got into the flock, not by jumping the fence, but by being born in the same barn as the sheep. Tell me about Leonard, I said. The runaway brother. We're still confirming a few things, she replied. But from what I've dug up, Leonard left Red Hollow in '68. He'd have been about 20 at the time of the murder, living in the same house as Maria in '64. That puts him in the sweet spot for opportunity and proximity. He moved to Indiana, changed jobs a lot, had a couple of minor arrests, bar fights, DUI, nothing violent on record beyond that. Died in 1998. No DNA in CODIS. His son is James's father, but that's not the line we're targeting. The age doesn't match quite right for him to be our guy at the time of the crime. So not Leonard, I said. Probably not, she agreed. Now, Thomas Carter's branch is a little more interesting. He had 2 sons. One died in Korea. The other, Henry, stayed local, had 3 boys. One of those boys, our unknown male, would have been 19 in 1964. Old enough to drive, old enough to work odd jobs around town, old enough to be invisible if nobody wanted to see him. Names? I asked. Working on it, she said. The paper trail gets messy. One left for New Jersey. One died young in some kind of work accident. And one, well, we're not entirely sure yet. There's some indication he might have been in and out of juvenile facilities. Those records are sealed. Of course they are, I muttered. Priya let that sit for a minute, then added, Look, Daniel, there's another factor you should know. When we compared the victim's DNA to the suspect's, there's a small but non-trivial amount of shared material. Not enough for immediate bells and whistles, but enough that, when combined with the genealogical data, points toward consanguinity. You're saying he was related to her, I said. Yes, she answered. And not just we share great-grandparents related. It could be as close as a first cousin. Maybe even closer. That's why the system lit up the way it did when we uploaded this. It's a tangled web. Incest. The word hovered unsaid between us. The part that rape kits and autopsies don't show. The invisible burn that runs through families long after the bruises fade. I'd seen enough of it to recognize the pattern. Victims who disappeared emotionally long before they disappeared physically. Relatives who insisted everything was fine while their eyes told a different story. What about Arthur? I asked. Maria's father's name felt heavy on my tongue. You're not the first to think it, she said quietly. But Arthur's been dead since '72. Car accident. There's no DNA on file, and we don't have any recorded biological material preserved from him. However, we did get partials from an old hairbrush that belonged to Maria's mother. That gave us enough to triangulate paternal contribution. It doesn't look like the suspect is her father. More like a cousin or uncle. So we're looking at a male cousin on the Carter side, I said. Someone close enough to be trusted. Close enough to get near a 12-year-old girl without raising alarms. That's the working theory, she said. Next step is building that last branch, and then, if we're lucky, finding a living relative who can confirm names and dates. Or a photograph. Sometimes a face does what data can't. I thanked her, promised to stay out of her hair unless she needed me, and hung up. For a long time, I just sat there at the table, staring at the screen, at the neat boxes and lines that turned a family into a circuit diagram. Somewhere in that maze of names was the breaker that had blown in March of 1964 and plunged one little girl's life into darkness. My job now was to flip every switch, no matter what it lit up. But there was another part of me, the part still listening for whispers in the ground, that couldn't stop replaying that plea. Don't let it be him. What if the dead could see the picture we were building more clearly than we could? What if they didn't like where it was pointing? Back in Red Hollow, the past doesn't stay buried. It just wears a different hat and sits at the end of the bar. The Rusty Nail was the only place in town that still looked busy on a Friday night. Neon beer signs glowed in the windows. A scattering of pickup trucks lined the gravel lot. Inside, the air was thick with grease, tobacco, and the particular perfume of old wood soaked in 1,000 spilled drinks. I hadn't come here for nostalgia. I'd come for a man named Paul Jennings. In 1964, Paul had been 16 and living 3 houses down from the Carters. He'd been one of the kids interviewed in the original investigation. Saw nothing, heard nothing, and then he'd grown up, stayed put, and watched the town crumble around him. Now he sat at the bar nursing the same brand of beer he'd been drinking the last time I saw him 20 years ago. His shoulders a little more hunched, his hair a little more gray, but the wary intelligence in his eyes still sharp. He spotted me before I reached him. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, his voice roughened by time and too many cigarettes. "If it isn't Danny Howell, back from the land of retirement." "Ran out of golf?" "Never started," I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "I hear it's bad for your blood pressure." "Everything's bad for your blood pressure at our age," he snorted. "What brings you back? Don't tell me you missed the cuisine." He gestured at the bowl of something fried and unidentifiable on the bar. "I came to ask about the Carters," I said. The humor in his face dimmed like someone had turned down a rheostat. "You people," he said. "Every few years, a new one of you comes sniffing around, like maybe the story's changed since the last time. It hasn't. This time it's different," I said. "We've got DNA. That word still has power, even in places where science usually takes a back seat to gossip and God." Paul's eyes narrowed. "So you found something?" he said. "We found someone," I corrected gently. "Or more accurately, we're pretty damn sure we will. And I think you know more about that someone than you told the cops back then." He stared at me for a long moment, then took a slow swallow of beer. "You're about 30 years too late for my conscience, Danny," he said. "Whatever I didn't say in 64, I've had plenty of time to regret." "Regret ages better when you share it," I said. "You lived on Maple. So did the Carters. So did Henry Carter's boys for a while. You saw things. Kids always do. Who was hanging around Maria back then? Who made you uneasy?" He chuckled, but there was no amusement in it. "You ask a man in a bar to tell you who made him uneasy 60 years ago. You're going to be here all night." "I've got time," I said. He looked down at his hands. They were big, work-gnarled, bordered with old scars. "You ever notice," he said slowly, "how the people who get remembered as monsters usually look like monsters in the pictures? It's convenient. Makes you feel like you'd have spotted them. But most of the worst men I've known look like milkmen. Teachers. The guy who fixes your car. Regular. That's how they get away with it. Who was the milkman on Maple in 1964? I asked. He threw me a sharp glance, then barked a short laugh. "You haven't changed. Always stepping 2 steps ahead in the dance." He sighed. "There was a cousin. On her daddy's side. Her folks never called him that in front of her, though. They just said, 'Henry's boy,' like the name stuck in their throats. He'd show up sometimes, help with repairs, paint the porch. He had this way of looking at you." Paul shuddered, just slightly, like he was trying to decide whether you were a person or a puzzle. "Name?" I pressed. "Back then, we called him Hank Jr.," he said. "I doubt that's what it said on his birth certificate, but that's what the neighborhood knew. Tall kid, dark hair, quiet, too quiet. I remember once we were all playing out in the street, tossing a ball around, and Maria tripped, skinned her knee. Nothing dramatic, but the way he watched her bleed, it stuck with me. Did you tell the police that?" I asked. "When they came asking?" He shook his head. "No, I told them what my father told me to say. Didn't see nothing, didn't hear nothing. Maria was a good girl. It's a damn shame. You didn't cross the Carters back then. Not the older men. Not the women either. They went to church every Sunday, but you could feel something twisted under the surface. Like a board with a warp in it. Looks fine until you put weight on it. Then it snaps. Do you know what happened to Hank Jr.? I asked. No, he said. He just stopped coming around. People said he left for work in the city. Others said he got in trouble, and they sent him away. Around here, away could mean prison, could mean an uncle's farm 2 counties over, could mean the bottom of the quarry. Nobody asked for details. Did you ever wonder, I said, if away started the day after Maria was found? Of course I wondered, he snapped. Then he slumped, the anger deflating. But wondering is one thing. Saying it out loud, where it can get back to people, that's another. I had a family. Plans. You think I was going to blow my life up on a maybe? This town forgives a lot, but it doesn't forgive turning on your own. I let that settle between us. Shame is a heavy enough load without someone else piling on. What about now? I asked quietly. You're not 16 anymore. Neither are they. Most of the people who could hurt you for talking are in the ground. Don't you ever think about Maria when you drive past that house? Don't you ever feel like the town is stuck? He stared at his reflection in the mirror behind the bar, at the rows of bottles lined up like tiny soldiers. You ever hear the train at night? He asked suddenly. The train? I repeated. There hasn't been a freight run through Red Hollow in 30 years, he said. Tracks are rusted, crossbucks rotting. But some nights, real late, when the wind's just right, you can hear it. The horn, the wheels on the rails. Like time forgot to check its watch, and a train from 1964 is still trying to get through. I thought of the light flickering at 317, the grave whispering, the glitching screen. Yeah, I said softly. I've heard things. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something like relief in his eyes. Then you know this place doesn't let go easy, he said. You pull on that thread, Annie Holley. You better be ready for what comes loose at the other end. If Hank Jr.'s your man, he's not just some stranger in an old photo. He's Red Hollow. He's Carter blood. You prove it. You're not just solving a murder. You're rewriting the gospel of this town. I'm not here for the gospel, I said. I'm here for the girl. He nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper. Last I heard, there was an old woman out by the lake, Henry Carter's widow. Dementia, they say, comes and goes. Sometimes she's sharp as a tack. Sometimes she thinks it's still 1960. People drop off groceries, check on her. No one wants to put her in a home, I guess. You want the truth about Hank Jr. If there is any truth left, you might find it in whatever's left of her head. He slid the paper toward me. An address. A name. Lucille Carter. You sure she talked to me? I asked. I'm not sure of anything, he said. Except this. The secrets in this town don't like the daylight. You've already got them stirring. Might as well see what crawls out. Lucille Carter's house sat alone near the edge of Hollow Lake, a sagging bungalow with peeling yellow paint and a porch that leaned toward the water like it was tired. The lake itself was calm, gray, holding the reflection of the overcast sky like a secret. Old men fished its edges. Teenagers drank on its banks and swore they saw things in the fog. As kids, they used to tell each other that if you listened close enough at night, you could hear the voices of everyone the lake had ever taken. I parked on the gravel patch that passed for a driveway and took a moment to listen. Nothing but the soft slap of water against the shore and the distant buzz of an outboard motor. No ghosts, not yet. When I knocked, it took a long time for anyone to answer. Just when I was about to try the handle, the door creaked open a few inches, and one sharp blue eye peered out at me through the gap. It was the kind of stare that has seen enough of the world to be unimpressed by most of it. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying, she said. Her voice had the papery thinness of age over a steel core. Good news, ma'am, I said. What I'm offering is free and mostly unpleasant. My name is Daniel Howley. I'm looking into something that happened a long time ago. I was hoping you could help. People only hope old women can help when they want something ugly dug up, she said. You a lawyer? Worse, I said. Cop. Retired. She snorted. Cops never retire. They just move their ghosts into smaller houses. She looked me up and down for a moment, then opened the door another few inches. You might as well come in. My knees aren't what they used to be, and I'm not standing here negotiating with you on the porch like some soap opera. Inside, the house smelled of dust, mothballs, and something faintly floral. The living room was cluttered but clean, the way of someone who had once cared deeply about order and now fought a losing battle with time. Photographs were everywhere, on the walls, on the mantel, on end tables, a chorus of frozen faces, weddings, graduations, Christmas mornings. I scanned them automatically, looking for anyone who might have once been called Hank Jr. Lucille shuffled to an armchair by the window and settled in with a soft grunt. Up close, she looked older than the house, late 80s, maybe 90, but there was nothing frail about her gaze. You're here about Maria, she said, before I could even ask. The back of my neck prickled. What makes you say that? She waved a thin hand. You've got that look, the one they all get when they knock on my door, like they're carrying a coffin in their eyes. Nobody comes out here to ask about fishing conditions. Has there been a lot of you? I asked. Over the years, she said. Every time the news did some cold case special, I'd get a visit. Young men with notepads. Old men with file folders. Women who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. They all asked the same things. I told them the same answers. Didn't change a thing. Maybe this time is different, I said. We have new tools. DNA, she said, tasting the letters. My grandniece tried to get me to spit in one of those tubes once. Find out your heritage, Grandma, she said, as if I didn't already know where my people came from. Didn't need a computer to tell me that Carters have bad tempers and worse luck. Do you mind if I ask you some questions about your husband's family? I asked gently. About his sons? Her eyes flicked to a shelf where a framed photo of a younger Lucille stood next to a man in a suit, his hair slicked back, his jaw set in the stubborn line common to old photographs. Henry Carter. Next to them, 3 boys in various stages of teenage awkwardness stared at the camera. One had a wide grin. One looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The third, slightly taller, shoulders a little too stiff, had an expression that made something cold move in my gut. You can ask, she said. Whether I remember is another matter. Some days my head is a room with all the doors open. Other days, it's a closet with the light off. Today, we'll see. She watched me as I stepped closer to the mantel. Which one is Hank Jr.? I asked. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. None of them. And all of them. People always got that wrong. My Henry hated that name. Said only one Hank in the house, and that was him. The boys were Thomas, Michael, and Lee. The neighbors called Thomas Jr. because he was the one most like his father. In the ways that counted, I pointed to the boy with the stiff shoulders, the one whose eyes didn't quite match the forced half-smile on his face. This him? That's Tommy, she said. Always did what he was told. Always watched more than he spoke. His daddy was proud of him, said he was solid. She made the words sound like a disease. Michael was the sweet one. Lee was the wild one. But Tommy, he was the one you didn't turn your back on when he was in a mood. Did he have a mood often? I asked. Men in this family are mostly moods in shirts, she said. Tommy was no different. He could go from calm to storm before you knew you needed an umbrella. Do you remember March of 1964? I asked. Around the time Maria disappeared? Her eyes clouded for a moment, then cleared. I remember the whole town went quiet, she said. The way it does right before lightning hits. People were scared. Not just for their kids, scared of looking too close at each other. Henry came home one night, face tight, jaw working. He said, "They're sniffing around, asking about our boy." I asked what they thought he had done. He said, "Nothing," because he didn't do nothing, and that's all they need to know. Did you believe him? I asked. She looked at me for a long time. "I was a good wife," she said finally. "Good wives believe their husbands. That's what the preacher said. That's what my mother said. But believing and knowing are not the same." "What did you know, Lucille?" I asked, keeping my voice soft. "I knew Tommy wasn't home that afternoon," she said. "He said he was working down at the garage, but the garage called looking for him at 4. I knew he came in after dark, smelling like the woods. I knew there was a rip in his shirt that hadn't been there that morning. I knew he washed his clothes himself that night, which he never did. And I knew when the police came around asking questions, Henry answered for him. Before they even finished asking, "Did anyone ever ask you?" I asked. "Men didn't ask women things like that back then," she said. "If they had, I'd have told them what I just told you. But they took Henry's word for gospel and wrote in their little books that Tommy was where he was supposed to be. And then we didn't talk about it. Not when the news came on. Not in church. Not at the dinner table. It was like the whole town agreed to put a blanket over it and sit on the edges. Where is Tommy now?" I asked. She gave a small, bitter smile. "That's the thing about blankets, Mr. Howley. They don't hold forever. Truth sweats. Secrets itch. Tommy left town 2 years after everything. His father said he got a job with a company in New Jersey. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. There were rumors. A girl in another county. Then another. Then a fight at a bar that sent him away for a while. We got letters at first, then fewer, then none. Henry said it was for the best. Let the boy start fresh, he said. No reason for him to be punished for a town's superstitions. Did you ever see him again?" I asked. "Once," she said. Her gaze drifted past me, out the window, to the gray stretch of lake. It was 78. He showed up on the porch one evening, out of nowhere. Thinner, harder, the kind of hard that doesn't come from work. He hugged me like he thought I might break. He hugged his brothers like he hadn't decided whether he was happy to see them. And then, late that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I heard him and his father arguing in the kitchen. "What about?" I asked. "About God," she said. Henry said, "You think he doesn't see? You think you can outrun what you did?" And Tommy laughed. Not the laugh of a boy. The kind of laugh you hear in bars at closing time. He said, "If he didn't stop me then, he's not going to start now." A chill slid down my spine. Did he say what then meant? I asked. She shook her head. They lowered their voices after that. Old houses carry sound, but not always the words you want. In the morning, he was gone. No note, no forwarding address. Just gone. Henry never spoke his name again. If someone slipped and mentioned him, he'd change the subject. When people asked, he'd say, "Tommy's taken care of," in a tone that made them think twice about asking how. "Do you believe he killed Maria?" I asked. Lucille's jaw worked, as if the answer had to fight its way out through a lifetime of being told to keep quiet. "Belief is a dangerous thing, Mr. Hawley," she said. "I believe the sun will rise, because it always has. I believe I loved my children, even when they made it hard. As for what Tommy did or didn't do, all I know is that after that girl died, something in him went dark. And once something goes that dark, it doesn't come back for free. The DNA suggests the man who attacked Maria was related to her," I said. I watched her carefully. "Carter blood. Likely a cousin. Likely from your branch." She closed her eyes. For a moment, the lines in her face deepened, and she seemed to shrink in the chair. "Then maybe God did see," she whispered. He saw, and he decided the punishment would be slow. Do you know where Tommy was buried? I asked. That made her open her eyes again, sharp and startled. Who said he was buried? Is he still alive? I asked. She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Not the fear of a frail old woman afraid of being alone. The fear of someone who has lived a long time with something lurking just past the edge of the property line. There are places, she said slowly, where the Carters bury their dead, and there are places where they bury their sins. Sometimes those two places are not the same. If Tommy died, Henry didn't tell me where. All he said, before he passed, was that the boy won't trouble anyone else. The phrase echoed something in my memory, my own father's voice, talking about a neighbor who'd been taken away by the police. Won't trouble anyone else. The adult translation of, we don't talk about him. Lucille, I said gently, if Tommy is still alive, there's a chance we can take his DNA and be done with guessing. If he's dead, there might still be ways. Old records, unmarked graves, but I need something to go on. A place he worked, a friend he mentioned, a town he mailed a letter from, anything. She hesitated, chewing at her lip. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up out of the chair and shuffled toward a small wooden desk in the corner. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened a drawer and reached inside. When she turned back toward me, she was holding a battered envelope, yellowed and creased, a stamp long since canceled. This is the last letter I got from him, she said. Henry never saw it. It came to the house after he took ill. I hid it. Foolish old woman, keeping secrets, eh? She handed it to me like it was a snake. I took it carefully. The postmark was faint but legible. 1979. A town name I recognized, not because it was famous, but because cops tend to remember which places generate case files. Millstone, New Jersey. Inside, on a single sheet, in tight, cramped handwriting, were a few sentences. Ma, don't expect forgiveness. Don't expect understanding. I just wanted you to know I'm still breathing. They say if you keep moving, the past can't catch you. I'm starting to think that's a lie. Some nights, I hear her. I think I see her by the tracks. Tell Dad he doesn't have to worry. I won't trouble anyone in Red Hollow again. No confession, no specifics. But enough guilt woven between the lines to choke a horse. Why keep this? I asked quietly. She shrugged one bony shoulder. Because even monsters are still your children. If you were there the day they learned to walk, she said. I thought if anyone came asking, really asking, not just checking boxes, maybe it would matter. It does, I said. More than you know. As I stood to leave, she stopped me with a question that caught me entirely off guard. Do you think she knows? She asked. Who? I said, though I already knew. Maria, she said, wherever she is. Do you think she knows you're doing this? That you're digging it all up after all this time? I thought of the grave, the voice, the wind, the flickering light at 317, the phantom train. I thought of her name on a stone, of bones in a box, of DNA spirals carrying stories across generations. I think, I said slowly, that if she doesn't know yet, she will. Lucille nodded, as if that matched some private theology she'd built over a long, hard life. Then don't stop halfway, she said. If you're going to drag the past out, don't let anyone shove it back in before it's finished talking. On my way out, I paused at the porch and looked back at her. She was framed in the doorway, small and stubborn, like a sentry at the edge of a battlefield. One more thing, I said. Do you ever hear the train at night? She smiled, and this time there was no bitterness in it, just a weary kind of acceptance. Some nights, she said, but I don't think it's coming for me. When I drove away, the lake lay flat and still, but as I passed the old railway crossing on the edge of town, My dashboard clock ticked over to 3:17 p.m., and in the distance, so faint I could almost pretend I'd imagined it, I heard the low, mournful wail of a train horn. There are only so many coincidences a man can rationalize before he has to admit something else might be at work. Whether that something was God, fate, or a dead 12-year-old girl who decided she'd waited long enough, I didn't know. All I knew was this: we were getting closer, and whatever waited at the end of this line was starting to move toward us too. Millstone, New Jersey, looked like the kind of town people drove through without remembering its name. Strip malls with half-empty parking lots. A tired main street with a barber shop that hadn't changed its sign font since 1972. Fast food wrappers doing lazy circles in the wind near the bus stop. The kind of place you land when you are not aiming anywhere in particular, or when you are trying hard not to be found. The letter from 1979 had given me the first solid pin on Tommy's post-Red Hollow life. It wasn't much, but cops have built whole cases out of less. People think investigations are about big breakthroughs, but most of the time it's just grinding. Cross-referencing addresses, knocking on doors, getting told no 100 times before you hear one reluctant maybe. The Millstone Police Department occupied a low brick building that looked like it used to be a post office. Inside, the air smelled of fluorescent lights and old coffee. The duty officer at the front desk, a guy in his 20s with a buzz cut and the resigned expression of someone 6 hours into a 12-hour shift, looked up as I came in. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked. "Name's Daniel Hawley," I said, offering my retired ID out of habit. "Used to be with Pennsylvania State Police. I'm looking into a historical matter. Wondering if you've got anyone who remembers this town in the late 70s. A detective, maybe. Someone with too many stories and not enough people willing to listen." He smirked despite himself. "That's oddly specific. It's also always true," I said. Turned out I wasn't wrong. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in a cramped office with a man who looked like he'd been carved out of an old staircase. Solid, worn smooth in places, splintered in others. His name was Frank Delaney, and he had technically retired 5 years ago, but no one had the heart to actually make him turn in his key, so he came in a few days a week to help with paperwork, which, from the stacks on his desk, he was not doing very effectively. "So you're chasing a ghost across state lines," he said after I gave him the condensed, sanitized version of the story. Cold case from the 60s, DNA match to a family branch. A suspect who might have lived in Millstone around 79. I did not mention the voices or the trains. "You boys up there really don't know how to let things go, huh?" "Letting things go is how they get tangled," I said. "You ever have a carter come through here?" First name Thomas. Might have gone by Tawny. Born somewhere around 45. Tall, dark hair. Quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the back of your neck itch. He leaned back in his chair, the springs complaining. "You just described half the guys who came through these doors between 75 and 85, he said. "But Carter, yeah, that rings a bell." He pushed himself up with a small grunt and went to a metal filing cabinet in the corner. Not the digital archive. Not even the main paper archive. The cabinet with the dents in it and a lock that had obviously been forced more than once. Every old cop has a private drawer, literal or metaphorical, where he keeps the cases that didn't file neatly into open or closed. "Back before everything went on computers," he said, rifling through folders. "We had a shorthand. If a guy made you uneasy, you started a folder on him, even if you never had enough to charge him with anything serious. Kept notes, habits, places he liked to drink, girls he liked to talk to. Sometimes it paid off. Sometimes it just made you feel like you were doing something other than waiting for the next call." He pulled out a folder with the name Carter, T scrawled across the tab in handwriting that matched the note on Maria's letter almost exactly. Squeezed, impatient, like the pen couldn't keep up with the mind. "Here we go," he said, dropping it on the desk between us. "Thomas Carter. Came to town around 77, give or take. No fixed address at first. Worked odd jobs. Construction, janitorial, whatever paid cash. Couple of bar fights, like you said. One assault charge that didn't stick because the victim left town before the hearing. We had our eye on him, but he was slippery. He opened the folder and began flipping through. Mugshots, grainy and black and white, stared up at us. One caught my attention. A man in his early 30s, hair lank, eyes half-lidded, jaw clenched. Hard to reconcile with the teenage boy in Lucille's photograph, but the bones were the same. The set to the mouth. The way the eyes seemed to be looking just past the camera, as if watching something only he could see. "That's him," I said. Delaney nodded. "Yeah, he was one of those guys who drew trouble to him like iron filings to a magnet. Not the loud, showy kind. The quiet, persistent kind. We were sure he was mixed up in some bad business. Girls, maybe, or drugs. But every time we thought we had something, it slipped away. Witnesses recanted. Evidence got lost, or the whole thing just fizzled. You ever connect him to any serious violence?" I asked. He hesitated, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the edge of the folder. "Officially? No," he said. "Unofficially, there was a girl. Isn't there always? 17. Ran with a rough crowd. Disappeared one summer. Everyone said she ran off with a boyfriend. Her mom swore up and down that she would never do that. We looked. We found nothing. No body, no trace. Just gone. And the last place she was seen, far as anyone could say, was at a bar where your friend Carter liked to sit in the corner and stare at people like he was measuring them. What happened to him?" I asked. "He just vanish again?" "More or less," Delaney said. "One day he was around. The next day he wasn't. No forwarding address, no goodbyes. We heard a rumor he'd gotten picked up in New York State on some parole violation, but this was back before all the systems talked to each other, and nobody ever confirmed it. I figured he'd end up dead in a ditch somewhere, and if we were lucky, there'd be enough left to ID him and close out a few of the open questions with a weary shrug." "How long was he here?" I asked. "Couple years at most," he said. "Long enough to leave a bad taste. Not long enough for anyone to really know him. Which, if you're a man trying to outrun your past, is probably the sweet spot. You ever hear him talk about where he came from?" I pressed. "Family? A small town in Pennsylvania, maybe?" "He wasn't much of a talker," Delaney said. "But I do remember one thing. Might be nothing. Might be something. He used to drink at a place called The Crossing. It was near the old railroad tracks. We'd find him out back sometimes, sitting on the gravel between the rails, staring off like he was waiting for God knows what. One night, I told him if he wasn't careful, a train was going to take his feet off. He laughed and said, 'If a train comes for me, officer, it won't stop at the feet.' I felt a cold knot form in my gut. 'The Crossing,' I repeated. 'Still there?' 'Got turned into a laundromat in the 90s, Delaney said. "Tracks are gone, too. Pulled up the rails. Like they were trying to erase the route." "In my experience," I said, "erasing the map doesn't change where the road went. Just makes it harder for people to admit they're lost." He gave me a long look, then nodded slowly. "You really think this guy ties back to your girl in 64? He asked. "I don't think anything yet," I said. "But the DNA thinks someone from that family did. And Tommy fits too many patterns for me to ignore. I need proof. Not just bad feelings. You're talking exhumation, aren't you?" He said. "Dig him up, swab his bones, see if the ghost in your case file matches the ghost in mine. That would be the cleanest route," I said. "Assuming he's dead. Which we don't actually know." Delaney sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You ever notice how the word closure It's thrown around like confetti by people who've never had to actually find it? He asked. Families think they want answers. Politicians think answers look good in campaign ads. But the truth? Sometimes answers hurt more than questions. You prove he did it. Your murder, my missing girl, maybe more. And all those people who tried not to see him for what he was have to live with the fact that he was sitting at their table the whole time. Not my job to protect their illusions, I said. Maybe not, he said. But you're not going to be the one sitting in a church pew with them when the town whispers start up again. He slid the folder toward me. I'll make you a copy, he said. Officially, it's part of our archive. Unofficially, if a man left this many cracks in the pavement, maybe somebody ought to follow them all the way. While he went to the back to wrestle with a copier that looked almost as old as some of the files, I stared at the mugshot again. Tommy Carter's eyes seemed to meet mine across the decades, flat and unimpressed. If he had a conscience, it was buried deep enough that even he didn't trip over it often. But guilt isn't always loud. Sometimes it just sits quietly, making sure you never quite rest. Some nights I hear her, he'd written to his mother. I think I see her by the tracks. You don't write words like that if all you did was forget to pay a parking ticket. Driving back to my motel, I passed what used to be the crossing. The bar's name was gone, replaced by Sunshine Laundromat in cheerful blue letters. Inside, a row of washing machines churned clothes into anonymous whirlpools. Mothers scrolled on their phones. Kids tugged at candy machines. No one looked like they knew or cared that the gravel under that laminate flooring had once held train rails, and that a man with red hollow in his blood had stood there and dared destiny to finish what it had started. I parked anyway. Out back, where the loading area now faced a narrow strip of cracked asphalt, there was a patch of ground where the grass didn't grow as thick. The faintest indentation ran across it, like an old scar. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd call it nothing. If you'd grown up around tracks, you'd know rust left fingerprints on the earth. I stepped down onto it, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and closed my eyes for a moment. The traffic noise from the main road faded, replaced, just for a second, by a different sound, a distant clatter, a low, rolling rumble, the long, mournful echo of a horn. When I opened my eyes, the street was the same. The laundromat hummed. A dog barked somewhere. But my watch said 3:17 p.m. You've got good timing, kid, I murmured. I'll give you that. People talk this way around the dead, like it's nothing. You apologize when you step on a grave. You say thank you when a lead pans out. You curse them when the evidence doesn't cooperate. It's not that you truly expect an answer. It's just easier to pretend the conversation is two-sided. This time, I got one. The wind shifted, cool against the back of my neck, and from somewhere between the sound of the dryers and the hum of passing cars, a girl's voice said, very clearly, "Don't let him disappear again." Not angry, not pleading, just insistent. The way a 12-year-old might say, "Don't forget my lunch," as she grabs her backpack on the way out the door. I turned, half expecting to see someone standing there. There was no one. Just a woman dragging a laundry basket to her car, and a man lighting a cigarette near the dumpster. You're getting soft, Holly, I muttered to myself. Hearing phantom pep talks now. But the thing about phantom pep talks is, sometimes you need exactly that little nudge to do the thing you were already considering. I took out my phone and called Priya before I could talk myself out of it. How do you feel about exhumations in other states? I asked when she picked up. Like they come with a ton of paperwork and more meetings than is healthy for anyone, she said. Why? Because if we want to be certain about Tommy Carter, we're going to have to either find him alive and willing to spit in a tube or find his bones, I said. New Jersey might have put him in the ground without realizing what they had. You think he died there? She asked. I think someone like him doesn't age into quiet retirement in a Florida condo, I said. And if he did, whoever shares the pool with him deserves to know too. Can you run a death record search? Thomas Carter, alias Tommy, rough DOB 1945, possible residence Millstone late 70s, maybe moved north after that. Check prison records too. If New York or Jersey stashed him, they might have tagged his DNA, which means we could skip the shovel. On it, she said. Give me a day or two. Government databases do not move at the speed of Netflix. I hung up, feeling that strange blend of momentum and helplessness that defines most investigations. You push and you wait. You knock and you wait. You send samples to labs and you wait. The universe doesn't care how badly you want an answer. It has its own pacing. On the drive back to Pennsylvania the next morning, the highway hummed under the tires in a monotonous drone. My thoughts drifted, not to DNA sequences or genealogical charts, but to a girl in a school dress, standing by a railroad crossing that no longer existed, holding a book bag in one hand and waving the other at a train only she could see. You're not just in the lab anymore, are you? I said aloud, to no one in particular. You're in the cracks. If grief can leave a mark on a room, if laughter can echo in an empty hallway, why couldn't injustice leave something behind too? Catholics have a word for it. Limbo. Not hell, not heaven, just the hallway in between, where the unresolved wait. If Maria was in a hallway, she had waited a long time. Priya called 2 days later, her voice humming with the particular energy of someone who has been staring at a screen for 20 hours and finally got the payoff. Good news, bad news, she said. Which first? Dealer's choice, I said. Good news. You are right to think he didn't retire quietly somewhere warm, she said. Bad news. If you wanted a nice, clean confession, you're about 40 years too late. Dead? I said. Dead? She confirmed. Thomas Carter, Dobb, February 1945, died in 1983 at the age of 38. Heart failure, officially, though the coroner in Ulster County, New York, noted complications from long-term substance abuse and possible prior trauma. He'd been in and out of state facilities for a few years before that. Drunk and disorderly, assault, you name it. The last time they brought him in, he collapsed in his cell. Never got back up. Ulster County, I repeated. So he did go north. Seems to be his pattern, she said. When things got hot, he moved. Pennsylvania to Jersey to New York. Always hugging the old rail lines like a tick following a vein. What about his DNA? I asked. You said prison records. That's where it gets interesting, she said. New York only started mandatory DNA collection for certain offenses in the late 80s. Your boy missed the digital age by a few years. There's no Cody's entry. However, I echoed. However, his body was buried in a county pauper cemetery, she said. No family claimed him. No headstone, just a number in a ledger. Which means if we can find that ledger and match it to a plot, we might be able to convince a judge that it's worth digging him up. State-to-state cooperation, all that fun red tape. But it's not impossible. Judges don't jump at the chance to exhume anonymous drunks from Potter's Fields, I said. True, she said. But judges do like 4th-Oldest unsolved homicide in American history. Now with DNA and genealogy and a compelling narrative about justice delayed, you make the right argument, wave the right charts, maybe bring a local day who likes cameras, and suddenly everyone's very invested in bringing closure to a community. Your cynicism warms my heart, I said. I work with data, she said. Data is neutral. People aren't. I'm just factoring human ego into the equation. We went over the details. Ulster County had records, scanned, mostly legible. She'd already traded emails with a clerk who'd been surprisingly helpful once she'd dropped the words cold case and possible family notification. There was, indeed, A burial record for a John Doe, identified only as Thomas C., white male, 38, deceased the 12th of March, 83, plot number and all. One more thing, she said before hanging up. The doctor who signed the death certificate wrote a note in the margin. Subject appeared malnourished, with evidence of old fractures to ribs and right hand. Severe scarring on back and upper arms, consistent with historical injuries, possibly inflicted in adolescence. Meaning what? I asked. Meaning someone used him like a punching bag when he was a kid, she said. Maybe a father. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe a priest with a bad temper. I'm not saying that excuses anything he did later, but it might explain some of the wiring. Most monsters don't build themselves, I said. They're a group project. Exactly, she said. Let me know when you want to make a field trip to New York. I'll bring the swabs. Getting the exhumation order felt, at times, more complicated than the science that would follow. Judges wanted to know why. Das wanted to know who would pay. The county wanted to know what would happen if they let one out-of-state cold case reach into their quiet cemetery. Would that open the floodgates? Everyone wanted assurances that this wasn't just an old cop indulging a personal obsession. They weren't entirely wrong about that last part. I sat through meetings where men in ties asked me questions they already knew the answers to, just to see if my version matched the memo in front of them. They folded their hands and furrowed their brows and said things like, "What do you hope to achieve?" As if naming the man who killed a 12-year-old girl and assaulted others wasn't self-evident. In the end, the thing that swayed them wasn't my years of experience or the thickness of the file. It was a photograph. I'd brought a copy of Maria's school portrait, black and white. She was smiling, a little uncertainly, the way kids do when adults tell them to sit still, a ribbon in her hair. Eyes that hadn't yet learned to look for danger everywhere. I put the photo on the table and said, "She never got to grow old enough to vote for you." Maybe it was manipulative. Maybe it was fair. Either way, it worked. The judge signed the order with a flourish that suggested he saw a future press conference in it. The Dey nodded, his lips pressed together in what he probably imagined was a solemn expression. Someone said the word closure again. I stopped listening. 2 weeks later, on a clear, cold morning in Ulster County, I found myself standing at another open grave. This one didn't have a name on it, just a numerical marker. 83 to 47. The trench was narrower, the coffin cheaper, the ceremony non-existent. No family, no friends. Just a couple of county workers who'd drawn the short straw, a court-appointed observer with a clipboard, Priya with her kit, and me. Seems wrong somehow, the court observer muttered as the coffin came up, streaked with clay. Digging up a man who no one cared enough to bury properly the first time. It's the opposite of wrong, I said. It's the first right thing we've done for him. Even if what it gets us is the ability to say, definitively, that he was the wrong kind of man. Priya gave me a brief look, assessing, curious, then focused on the work. She was different out here than in the lab. More contained, somehow. As if the presence of the actual dead made her more careful with her movements, her silence. When the lid came off, the smell was a faint, dry must at the back of the throat, not the gut punch of fresh decay. Time had worked its slow alchemy. Bone, a few scraps of clothing, the suggestion of a human shape. Whatever else he'd been in life, in death he was just another arrangement of calcium and memory. Priya took samples from the femur, from a tooth, from the dense pelvic bone that tends to guard DNA the longest. She labeled vials with the meticulous precision of someone who knows that a single smudged digit can undo months of work. While she did, I found my gaze drifting to the blank patch of earth beyond, where unmarked graves marched in rows. How many stories lay there, unasked, unremembered? Not all of them were murderers. Some were just poor, alone, forgotten. But the ground doesn't differentiate. It takes them all the same. "Okay," she said finally, stepping back. "We've got what we need. Now we let the machines talk." As the coffin lowered back into the ground, the wind picked up, tugging at my coat. A flurry of dry leaves skittered across the grave. One stuck against my shoe. When I bent to brush it away, I heard, faint but unmistakable, the distant echo of a girl's voice. "You found him," it said, not accusatory. Not satisfied, just acknowledging. "I think we did," I murmured. "Now we see who he really is." No one else reacted. The court observer was already checking his watch. The county workers were adjusting the backhoe. Priya was sealing her kit. If the dead were talking, they were talking only to me. On the drive back, she glanced over at me from the passenger seat. "You're quiet," she said. "Trying not to anthropomorphize a corpse," I said. "That's a very specific hobby," she said. "You ever get the feeling, working with this stuff, that the cases lean?" I asked. "Like they tilt toward you when you're close, and away from you when you're not?" She considered that. "Data clusters," she said. "Some things naturally group. Humans are pattern-seeking machines, so we notice. But if you're asking whether I've ever felt like a case wanted to be solved, the answer is yes. I just don't put that in the report." "Good," I said. "I'd hate to be the only one losing his mind." "You're not losing it," she said. "You're just letting in some noise with the signal. Occupational hazard. Does your noise ever talk?" I asked before I could stop myself. She gave me a sideways look. "Once, after a 48-hour shift, I swore a set of peaks spelled out my name," she said. "Does that count?" I thought of the glitch on her screen. DH to 572. "More than you know," I said. The results took longer this time. Bone DNA, especially from old remains, is prickly stuff. It resists, it crumbles, it degrades in ways that make machines work harder. Priya kept me updated with texts that read like dispatches from a war zone. First run partial, rerunning. Contamination in lane 3, redoing extract. Tell your ghost to sit down and wait like everyone else. Each one gnawed at my patience. I tried to distract myself with other things. Walking, reading, pretending my houseplant needed more attention than it did, but every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. When the call finally came, I was in the grocery store, staring at a wall of cereal boxes bright enough to give a man a migraine. I answered on the first ring. "Tell me you're not calling to ask about my car's extended warranty," I said. "I can't speak for your car, but I can tell you about your killer," Priya said. I stepped out of the aisle, suddenly needing more space around me. "You're sure?" I asked. "As sure as modern science lets us be," she said. "The profile from Thomas Carter's remains matches the unknown male DNA recovered from Maria's clothing. Not just a little, not just related, full match. Within the acceptable margins of error, of course." For a moment, the store's noises, carts squeaking, kids whining, music playing too softly to recognize, faded into a dull buzz. It was just me and her voice, and the weight of 60 years collapsing into a single fact. "It's him," I said. "It's him," she confirmed. "The man in the unmarked grave in New York is the man who attacked and murdered a 12-year-old girl in Pennsylvania in 1964. And if your friend in Jersey is right, probably not the only person he hurt. Somewhere between the canned soup and the pasta aisle, my knees felt less reliable. I leaned against a shelf, ignoring the curious glance from an older woman pushing a cart. "You okay?" Priya asked, hearing the silence. "Depends on your definition," I said. "We wanted closure. We got a dead man in a potter's field who can't stand up in a courtroom and listen to what he did. We can put his name on the file. We can tell what's left of the family. We can maybe clear some side cases in other states. But justice? Justice is a flexible concept," she said quietly. "But for what it's worth, Daniel, this is rare. A case this old, this cold, with this kind of answer. Most of the time, the dead stay question marks. You saying we should throw a party? I asked. I'm saying, she replied, that a little girl who's been waiting in a box for 58 years just got to point at someone and say, "It was him." That has to count for something. I thought of the voice by the grave. Don't let it be him. And then, later, you found him. Funny thing, I said. I'm not sure she wanted that answer. Victims don't always get to choose the truth, Priya said. But they deserve to have it known. We went over the next steps. Official reports, press releases, coordinated statements between agencies. There would be a meeting with what remained of the Carter line, distant relatives who'd inherited a curse they didn't earn. There would be interviews with old neighbors. Maybe a documentary, if some producer caught the scent of a narrative he could sell. People like to consume tragedy packaged neatly, with a beginning, middle, and end. I'd spent my whole career knowing that most stories don't oblige. When I hung up, I realized I was standing in front of a display of train-shaped cereal boxes. A marketing tie-in for some kid's show. The cartoon engine grinned at me from 20 identical packages, wheels chugging through stylized puffs of steam. Of course, I muttered. Why not? That night, sleep came in fits. Every time I drifted close, my mind jerked me back with another image. Maria on the porch. Maria in the woods. Maria by the tracks. Tommy's mugshot. Lucille's tired face. Paul at the bar, listening for trains that shouldn't exist anymore. The unmarked grave with its numerical marker, 83 to 47, like a Bible verse no one ever read aloud. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up and went to sit in the living room. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that amplifies every little sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old wood, the distant whistle of wind around the eaves. My eyes drifted to the box of old case files in the corner, the one labeled unresolved, personal. Maria's file sat on top again, as if it knew it belonged there. You got your answer, I said softly. Was it worth it? The heating system clicked on with a low groan. Somewhere outside, a late-night car rolled past, tires hissing on the damp street. And then, from the direction of the hallway, a faint glimmer of light. It was 3:17 a.m. I don't have lamps on timers. I don't have fancy smart bulbs. There is no earthly reason for the little nightlight in the hall, the one I plug in when my niece visits with her kids, to flicker on by itself. But there it was, glowing dimly, casting a small, hesitant circle of light on the floor, like a doorway someone forgot to close. I got up slowly and walked toward it. The air felt cooler by the hall, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees over those 4 feet of carpet. I stopped with my hand hovering over the plug, torn between the instinct to turn it off and the absurd feeling that doing so would be rude. Maria, I said. Saying her name out loud in my own house felt like crossing some kind of line. We know it was him. Your cousin, Tommy. We can't put him on trial, but we can put his name in the record. We can hang it around his neck where it belongs. Is that enough? For a moment, nothing happened. Then the light flickered once, twice, like a blink. You can read meaning into anything if you try hard enough. Tea leaves, cloud shapes. The way a bulb stutters before burning out. But standing there in my hallway, in the middle of the night, I felt less like a man forcing patterns and more like someone finally picking up the other end of a call that had been ringing for decades. You're not done, are you? I said. The light steadied. It didn't brighten, didn't dim. Just held. Right, I said, because naming him is one thing. Admitting how close he was, that's another. Behind my eyes, the family tree unfolded again. Boxes, lines, names, and somewhere in that tangle, not just the connection between Maria and Tommy, but threads that might lead further, to other girls in other towns, to quiet deals and buried sins. We'll tell them, I said, your family. The parts that are left, The parts that weren't rotten will tell the town. Will tell anyone who thinks a familiar last name means safety. And then, I didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The house seemed to exhale, a tiny easing of the pressure I hadn't known I was holding. The clock on the wall ticked over to 3:18. A nightlight went out. In the dark, my heart finally slowed to something resembling normal. Tomorrow, there would be meetings and statements and the delicate, painful task of telling people that the ghost that had haunted their town had a familiar face. Tomorrow, the living would do what they always do: argue, deny, bargain, cry. But tonight, in the quiet of my own house, standing in a patch of cooling air where no draft should be, I allowed myself one dangerous thought. Maybe, just maybe, the dead girl on the other end of this impossible line had stopped tapping her foot for the first time in 58 years. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when you tell people a monster's last name is the same as theirs. It isn't the sharp, shocked silence of sudden tragedy, or the heavy, exhausted hush of a funeral. It's a hollowing out, like the walls have stepped back a few inches, and the floor has become less reliable. It's the sound of identity cracking. The conference room at the county building in Heselton was bland by design neutral carpet, neutral walls, a clock that ticked too loudly, a pot of coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the 70s. On one side of the table sat a handful of people who represented what remained of the Carter line. A woman in her 60s with Maria's eyes and none of her softness. Her son, mid-40s, jaw clenched. A distant cousin from out of state who had driven all night because the word murder in a voicemail still has that kind of power. On the other side sat the uniforms and the suit state police. DA's office, a PR person who kept adjusting her notes as if she could edit reality by tweaking bullet points. Priya sat near the end, a stack of charts and printouts sheathed in plastic. I sat beside her, the unofficial bridge between past and present. Lieutenant Branson, the current lead on the cold case unit, did the talking. He was good at its steady voice, respectful tone, just enough humanity to sound like a person and not a press release. He walked them through the basics: the original investigation, the preservation of evidence, the advances in DNA, the genealogical work. He explained what words like centimorgans and haplogroup meant in plain language, turning the science into a story. They listened, some with arms crossed, some with hands clasped, one with a notepad she never actually wrote on, as if holding a pen might keep her from falling apart. And so, Branson said, his gaze resting briefly on each of them before settling on the woman with Maria's eyes. Through a combination of forensic DNA analysis and genealogical research, we were able to identify a likely suspect, a man whose DNA profile matched the material found on Maria's clothing, a man who, at the time of her murder, was a young adult living within proximity to the crime scene. He glanced at Priya, who slid a folder toward him. His name was Thomas Carter. The woman flinched as if someone had slammed a door behind her. Her son's jaw tightened further, a muscle jumping in his cheek. The cousin sucked in a breath. "No," the woman said. Not loud, not dramatic. Just flat, like she was refusing a second cup of coffee. "No, that's not possible." Branson nodded, as if he'd expected that. "I understand this is difficult to hear, Miss Fallon," he said, "but the evidence is conclusive. We exhumed Mr. Carter's remains from a cemetery in New York and compared his DNA directly to the sample from 1964. The match is—" "No," she repeated, louder now. "You don't understand. The Carters are the ones who lost her. We are the ones who wore that grief. We are the ones people looked at in church and whispered about because she never made it home. We are not—" She swallowed hard. "We are not the ones who took her." "You're not," Priya said quietly, speaking up for the first time. "You personally are not. Grief and guilt aren't inherited traits. But genes are. That's what we're talking about here. Not your choices, his. The woman's eyes flicked to her. You're the one with the computer, she said. Maybe your computer is wrong. Priya didn't flinch. I wish it were, she said. But if we ran these samples 100 times, we'd get the same answer. DNA is inconvenient that way. It doesn't care about shame or reputation. It just is. I watched the son. He hadn't spoken yet, but his hands were clenched so tight on the table that his knuckles had gone white. He finally let go and sat back, exhaling slowly. Tommy, he said, testing the name like it tasted bad. My grandmother talked about a cousin who left. Said he was no good, but never said why. Just one of those stories that hangs in the air with no details. We always assumed it was drinking, gambling, something small enough to joke about and big enough to hide. Not, he gestured vaguely, as if the word murder wouldn't fit in his mouth. The records we've gathered show a pattern of behavior, I said, keeping my voice even. Bar fights, assaults, a missing girl in New Jersey who was last seen in the same bar he frequented. He didn't start with Maria, and he didn't stop with her. But she is the point where the evidence finally caught him, even if it took 58 years to close the loop. So you want us to what? The woman Fallon asked. Thank you? Forgive him? Disown a dead man we never knew we had? No, I said. We want you to know. Because the rumors have been running your lives longer than the truth has. Because for 6 decades, people have whispered that maybe Maria did something wrong. Walked the wrong way. Talked to the wrong stranger. Trusted the wrong boy. We're here to tell you that the wrong boy was one of yours. And that's a horror, but it's a horror you didn't create. He did. The cousin from out of state spoke up, voice tight. Will his name be public? She asked. In the news, I mean. It will, the PR woman said. But so will the context. That he's deceased, that he acted alone, as far as we know. That this does not reflect on the entire family. Yes, it does, Fallon snapped. Of course it does. My maiden name is Carter. Every time someone reads this story, that name will clang in their head. Carter. Carter. Isn't there a Carter who lives down the street? You can't put a last name in a headline and then tell me it doesn't stick to everyone who shares it. She wasn't wrong. Headlines don't care about nuance. People are going to think what they think, I said. We can't stop that. What we can do is give you something you've never had, a concrete, scientific answer. You don't have to wonder anymore if it was a stranger or a drifter or some faceless evil. You can put a face to it. You can look at your family tree and draw a hard line through one name. She looked at me, really looked, and I saw it land, the anger, the grief, the sick understanding that none of this could be unchanged now that it was spoken. You came here once before, she said suddenly. Years ago, when they did the TV special, you talked to my mother. She cried for a week after you left. Said you'd stirred up the dust. I remember, I said. She kept Maria's room the same. The curtains, the bedspread, like she was just late. Fallon's eyes filled with tears that she blinked away with practiced ruthlessness. She died thinking some stranger took her daughter, she said. Now you're telling me it was someone she might have fed at her table. Yes, I said. There was no soft way around it. But you're the one still here. You get to decide what to do with that. For a moment, the room was very still. Then, slowly, Fallon straightened her shoulders. What I'm going to do, she said, is go to her grave with your report in my hand and tell her the truth. She's waited long enough. Branson slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the key documents, the lab results, the genealogical charts, the exhumation order, the summary of findings. The DA added a prepared statement, full of phrases like closure and long-awaited justice. It all looked so neat on paper. Black ink on white, as if the story had always been this clean. As we broke up, The cousin paused by me. "Do you hear them?" She asked. "Who?" I said, playing dumb out of reflex. "The dead," she said. "My grandmother used to swear she heard Maria on the stairs at night. Said the wood creaked different when it was her. I thought it was just grief. But after she passed, there were a few nights when I slept in that house and—" She trailed off, embarrassed. "Never mind. You don't have to convince me," I said quietly. "Let's just say you're not the only one who thinks some cases." Echo. She studied my face for a moment, then nodded, as if filing that away in some private ledger. "Then tell her I'm sorry I wasn't braver sooner," she said. "If she's listening." "I will," I said. On my way out, I passed the building's main hallway, where a series of framed newspaper clippings showcased notable moments in local law enforcement history. There, amid faded headlines about narcotics busts and storm responses, someone had already tacked up a mock-up of the press release that would go out the next day. Cold case of 9-year-old girl solved after 58 years through DNA. Beneath it, a draft headline from a major outlet: 4th-Oldest cold case in U.S. History cracked by genetic genealogy. Maria's school photo sat in the middle, her small face looking out over a hallway she had never walked. Hook, I thought, with a grim sort of irony. Heighten. Hold. The Triple H of storytelling. A child's murder. A decades-long mystery. A triumph of technology. A narrative anyone could sell. Somewhere behind the glossy arc of that story were quieter, uglier truths. A family that had eaten dinner with its own wolf. A town that had looked the other way. A boy who'd been broken before he broke others. The cameras wouldn't linger on those. The press conference the next day was exactly what you would expect. Microphones on stands. A backdrop with logos. A row of officials in regulation sorrow. Reporters leaned forward, pens and recorders at the ready, eyes bright in that way that always made me feel slightly queasy. I'd been on both sides of that equation too many times. Tragedy makes good copy. Branson did his part. He laid out the timeline, hit the beats, gave credit to the lab, to Priya, to the persistence of the department over nearly 6 decades. He mentioned the number of personnel who had worked the case, the hours spent, the files preserved. He said Maurice's name, because that's who she really was, in the record, not the fictional Maria I had carried in my head for so long, and when he did, his voice caught just enough to satisfy the cameras. It is believed to be the 4th-oldest cold case in the United States to be solved using genetic genealogy, and the oldest in Pennsylvania, he said, quoting the prepared line. Flashes popped, pens scratched. A reporter asked the inevitable question. Does the family feel this brings closure? Fallon, who had agreed reluctantly to stand at the podium, took a breath and stepped up. People keep using that word, she said into the cluster of microphones. Closure. Like this is a book we can finally close and put on a shelf. But this isn't a book. It's a wound. Knowing who held the knife doesn't make the scar disappear. But it does stop us from wondering if the knife was in our own hand. For that, we're grateful. And tired. It was the best answer anyone could have given. Honest, sharp. The room shifted, some of the reporters' faces softening, others already calculating the pull quote. Afterward, as the crowd thinned, one of the younger detectives from the cold case unit came over to me. You should be up there, he said. You did half this work. I did half the legwork, I said. DNA did the work. And a dead man's bones. He hesitated. Can I ask you something, sir? You just did, I said. But I'll allow one more. Do you ever feel... He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Like these cases are more than just cases. Like there's something else that wants them solved? His cheeks colored as he spoke, like he was ashamed of the thought. Yes, I said simply. All the time, he blinked. I thought you were going to tell me I was crazy. "Oh, you probably are," I said. "But not because of that. This job rewires your brain. You stare at the worst of humanity long enough, you start looking for anything that suggests the universe isn't completely indifferent. Some of us find it in church, some in the bottom of a bottle, some in the way a piece of evidence shows up at just the right time." I paused. "Just be careful with it. Believing a case wants to be solved can keep you going. It can also make you see things that aren't there. You think we saw things that weren't there with Carter?" he asked. I thought of the letters, the bruises in his history, the bar in Millstone, the missing girl, the exhumation, the lab match, the soot of his life smeared across the map. "No," I said. "With him, we saw exactly what was there. We just refused to look at it for a long time." In the weeks that followed, the story did what stories do in the modern age. It spread, mutated, spawned commentary and think pieces. There were interviews with experts on genetic genealogy, explaining how distant matches and family trees could now crack cases that had stumped entire departments for generations. There were op-eds about privacy, about whether uploading your spit to a consumer database makes your third cousin twice removed might find himself in handcuffs someday. There were segments on cable news with titles like Miracle of DNA and Cold Justice. What there wasn't, at least not in the public version, was the strange parallel story I'd been living. The trains at 317, the whispers at gravesides, the nightlight in my hallway. That stayed with me, a private commentary track under the main feature. Life, or what passed for it, drifted back toward normal. Other cases jostled for attention. Bills needed paying. The grocery store still rearranged its aisles in ways that made no sense. But the edges of my days felt different, as if some constant, low-level buzzing had eased. One evening, about a month after the press conference, I drove back out to Red Hollow, not for official business, not for interviews, just because there was something left undone. The Carter house looked the same as it had the last time I'd been there. Sagging porch, blue paint, a light in the front window. The woman who lived there now, Peggy, the nurse, answered the door with a wary smile that relaxed when she recognized me. "Back for round 2?" she asked. "I don't have any new ghost stories for you." "Good," I said. "I came to tell you the old one finally has an ending." We sat in the living room, in the same spots as before her in the chair by the window, me on the edge of the couch. I told her, in broad strokes, what we'd found. The DNA, the cousin, the grave in New York. I saw her eyes drift, more than once, to the spot on the wall where a clock hung. "What time did you say she was supposed to be home?" she asked softly when I finished. 3:15, I said. They figured she went missing around 3:07. The call to police came in at 3:42. She nodded slowly. "The light flickered again," she said. "This year, right on time. First week of March. My granddaughter was here again. She's 7 now. When it happened, she didn't say anything about a girl on the porch this time. She just looked at the window and said, 'She's not lost anymore.'" A chill danced along my arms. "Did you ask her what she meant?" I said. "Kids say things," Peggy said, with the tone of someone who has decided not to tug on a thread too hard. "Sometimes it's better to just let the air carry it." "Sometimes," I said. "And sometimes the air's been carrying it for 58 years and is tired of the weight." She smiled faintly at that. "You think telling her family the truth changes anything for her?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "But it changes something for us. And maybe that's connected." We walked out onto the porch. The afternoon was dipping toward evening, the sky streaked with the colors of a day that had decided to take its time leaving. The street was quiet. A car passed, the driver not looking at the house that had once held a woman, watching for a daughter who never came home. "Do you still hear the train?" I asked. "Sometimes," she said, "but not as often, and not as loud." We stood there in silence for a while. Then, almost on cue, The digital numbers on my watch rolled to 3:17 p.m. Nothing happened. No flicker, no horn, no whisper. Just the steady thrum of a world that, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like it was holding its breath. Maybe she caught it, I said. Peggy glanced at me. Caught what? The train, I said. The one that's been trying to get through all these years. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. You talk like my grandmother, she said. She used to say time was like a railroad. Sometimes things get stuck on sidings. Sometimes they get routed wrong. But sooner or later, every train ends up where it was supposed to go. Even if it takes the long way. Smart woman, I said. We said our goodbyes. I walked back toward my car, gravel crunching underfoot. Just before I opened the door, I felt it a brief, cool brush against my shoulder, like the lightest possible touch of a small hand. Thank you, a voice said. Clear, close, right next to my ear. I didn't turn, didn't jerk, didn't look around wildly like the rookie version of me might have. I just stood there, eyes closed, and let the words settle. You're welcome, I said. When I opened my eyes again, the world was exactly the same. Faded houses, leaning porches, old trees. But the weight I'd been carrying since that night in my basement, when I'd opened the old banker's box and met a girl on paper, felt lighter. Not gone. It would never be gone. That's not how this works. But shifted, redistributed, like a load finally shared. On paper, the story ended there. Killer identified, family informed, case closed. But lives don't have clean endpoints. They just keep unfolding until they don't. For weeks, small ripples kept reaching me. A letter from the mother of the girl in New Jersey, who had disappeared in the late 70s, thanking us for mentioning discreetly that the same man was strongly suspected in similar assaults. She said she slept better knowing there was a name attached to the shadow in her memory, even if the law would never stamp it in red letters. An email from a young genealogist who had read about the case and wanted to help on others, his words buzzing with the earnest energy of someone who has just realized they can tilt the world a few degrees if they push in the right place. A voicemail from Lucille's grandniece, telling me that the old woman by the lake had passed away quietly in her sleep, and that, in her last week, she kept saying, "The train's on time now. I can hear it. I went to the funeral, stood at the back, watched them lower a woman into the ground who had spent her life balancing love for a son with the suspicion that he had done something unspeakable. The priest talked about forgiveness. I thought about accountability. Somewhere between the two, maybe she'd found a little peace. One night, months later, I found myself in my basement again, staring at the box labeled Unresolved Personal. There were still files inside, edges frayed, stories half told. A missing man from 92, a double homicide from 01, a hit and run from 85. Each one a ghost raising its hand. I picked up the first file and felt, for just a second, a flicker in the corner of my vision. A small figure in the doorway. Dark hair, ribbon. Watching. You're not the only one, I said. There are others waiting. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. And then, like a trick of the light, it was gone. Maybe it had never been there. Maybe I was a man of 57 talking to shadows because it was easier than talking to retirement. But as I flipped open the next file and began to read, I realized something important. For years, the dead had been weight, names on my shoulders, faces in my dreams. Now, a few of them were. Company. Okay, I said to the room, to the files, to whatever else might be listening. Let's see who's next in line. Somewhere far away, a train horn sounded. Not at 3:17 this time, just whenever it wanted. And for the first time since standing over that grave and hearing the ground whisper my name, I did not feel like I was being called to account. I felt like I was being invited.